Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of Wild and Live, the shoe, not the show that brings you some of the coolest animal facts, and also some fabulous guests too. How are you all doing? I hope everybody's doing well. It's the start of a new week. We all feeling fresh-faced and bushy-tailed, or however the phrase goes. Last week we were joined by a couple of cool guests. We had Benito Wainwright, who's talking about his love for butterflies, in particular butterfly brains. He scans butterfly brains for a living, which sounds super cool. He was able to give us a nice little insight into the world of butterflies, which was fab. Before I introduce our next guest, I'd like to remind you, if you're a new subscriber, if you're a new viewer, I should say, there is a button right down there. It says subscribe. Smash that button, join us. We are now over 100 subscribers, and this is going great. I'm loving it, and I hope you're enjoying it too. Today's guest is someone who has a very strong and deep and rooted passion for swans. She works at the Wildlife, the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust in Slimbridge. Dr Julia Newth, are you wild and live?
I am. Hello. Morning.
Nice. Let's see if we can see you up on here. There you are. Brilliant. Nice. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's get talking about swans. I believe there are about 6 species of swan. Is that correct? Is it 6 or 7?
So globally, there's 8 species around the world.
Okay, there's 8. I could be completely wrong. I've seen different bits of research saying there are 6, some said 7. Why is there a discrepancy? Is that just my doing bad research?
Yeah, there's a bit of debate as to whether there's 7 or 8, because one of the swans is called a Coscaroba swan from South America, and there's some debate about whether it actually falls into more the goose sort of category, but the swan enthusiasts have enthusiastically sort of adopted the Coscaroba as part of the swan family. So we say there are 8 swan species.
Okay, so there are 8 swan species in the world. For me in particular, there are 3 that seem very similar. The Bewicks, mute swans, and hooper swans. How can we tell? What's the easiest way to tell the difference between the three of them?
Yeah, so those 3 species are in the UK, and the mute swan is the biggest swan that you're likely to see, and they're here all year round. So when you go out for your walks along the canals and along the rivers, and you see your big white swans with a black bobble above their beak, a jet black beak, orangey beak. They're the mute swans. They have this sort of like grunty noise as well. So they're not mute. They do make a sound, but it's quite a grunty sort of hissy sort of noise. And then you have the hooper swans and the Bewick swans. Now they're quite difficult to tell apart actually. They're only here with us for the winter because they're migratory. But they both have this black and yellow bill pattern. And the best way I think that you can sort of tell them apart is by looking at the shape of the yellow on the bill. And for the hooper swan, it's more like a sort of a wedge of cheese. And for the Bewick swan, that yellow is more like a blob of butter. But ultimately, the Bewick swan is a little bit smaller than the hooper swan, but they're very difficult to tell apart, actually.
A blob of butter. I've never heard of that. In relation to a swan. To everybody that's watching, thanks for tuning in. I know that we often have sound issues, and I apologise. Hopefully, I will talk a bit slower and clearly, and hopefully you can hear what I'm saying. We're talking about swans with Julia Newth from WWT Slimbridge. You work with Bewick swans. How do they compare to other waterfowl species when it comes to like their height, their size, their wingspan? They are impressive birds.
Swans are huge. Most people can recognise a swan for its long neck, and it's a big-bodied bird. And they really do stand apart from the other wildfowl species just by their sheer size alone.
And so they are quite big. I've heard a number of different accounts on this that swans are powerful enough to break your arm, break a leg. Is this true? Is there any truth in that, or is that just common folklore?
You know, I think that's generally a bit of folklore. We hear that probably more often than it actually really happens. The mute swan, so that's the biggest swan that's in the UK, probably does have the strength to break a few bones. They're really, really big, strong birds. But as to whether they do that, very, very rarely. In fact, I don't really know of any incidents. So I think it's become this sort of myth that's kind of, it's quite persistent. You see it quite often, don't you? That sort of idea. But I think there's not a huge amount of truth in it, really.
These birds get really big. I believe they are the biggest of the waterfowl species. They're the biggest flying birds. Biggest waterfowl species. How do they get so big? Do they have a special diet that allows them to get so massive?
They've actually, might be quite surprising, but they've got quite a simple diet. They're largely vegetarian, actually. So they like feasting on a range of plants, from pond weeds. So you sometimes see them dipping upside down with their bums in the air. That's when they're sort of eating their pond weeds. But they also love munching on old potatoes, maize, sugar beets.
Old potatoes?
Yum.
That's a new one.
Yeah, sort of agricultural farmlands, any sort of waste crops they sort of chomp away at. So they're very sort of versatile. They can adapt between sort of different habitats quite easily, but largely plant-based sort of diet.
Yeah. Given how big they are, they do get. How heavy do Bewick swans get?
Well, Bewicks, they can be around 6 to 7 kilograms, but when you're looking at your bigger mute swans, they can reach 12, 13 kilograms. And the trumpeter swans, again from North America, they can go up to about 14 kilograms. So the Bewicks, actually, of the swan family, are one of the smallest, actually.
One of the smallest, but they are still big, and despite their size, they are able to fly, and not just fly, a couple of meters or a couple of miles. They have the ability to undertake these huge migrations. Can you tell us about some of the flyways that they have and where they move to and from?
Yes, I think it's one of the most extraordinary things about the Bewick swan is they're so big-bodied, but they just kind of venture on these huge journeys. So the Bewick swan breeds in the high Arctic Russia, on the Russian tundra, which is a huge wetland across the north coast of Russia. And every autumn they migrate about 2,500 miles into Western Europe to escape the Arctic winter, and they spend the rest of the year, so the rest of the winter, in countries like the UK and the Netherlands. But yeah, it's a huge journey for them, and they sort of leapfrog along the way and stop off at different wetland sites along their migration.
So they're coming all the way from Russia, from the Arctic Russia, flying across northern Europe, and eventually they make their way to the UK. We get quite a lot of them over here, and get quite a lot in Slimbridge. How many do you get? That must be quite a fantastic sight once they finally arrive in the winter.
Oh, it's absolutely amazing, and we're really lucky actually to have them here at Slimbridge. Because there's only 200 or 300 swans that come to Slimbridge each winter, and it's a declining species. So the fact we can still have this number at our wetland site's amazing. But it's a huge amount of excitement builds up actually in the autumn. People get very excited about their arrival, and then they start to arrive in October. And then in the midwinter, you then sort of start to see, a couple of hundred swans flying into the main lake every day. And when large numbers arrive at once, we call it a swanfall. It's sort of almost a bit like a snowfall, these sort of white things drop out of the sky.
I mean, we're having a look at some of that.
Down into a lake, and it's
I'm playing some of the footage that you sent me, some of the clips of these swans coming into land, and they look so graceful as they come and land on the water. Just amazing.
Yeah, and they evoke this sort of magical sort of atmosphere, because as they sort of come into land, they quite often call, and they've got this really lovely soft songful bugling call, and it's just really wonderful to see them all flying in every day.
Some of your work involves taking a sort of classroom register for Bewick swans as they arrive. I thought that you had some sort of automatic, I don't know, beak recognition technology, but you don't. You're doing this all by sight. How are you able to tell the difference between not only different species of swan that look similar, but different individuals?
Yeah, so each individual Bewick swan has a very unique, distinct bill pattern, this black and yellow bill pattern. So each ones that are arriving at Slimbridge, and every morning during the winter, my colleague Steve Heaven runs through all of the swans that are arriving and records and documents by photography, but also by drawing each different bill pattern. It's a bit like a school register, and each swan is named. And it just means that year after year, we recognise the same swans, and it really builds up a picture of their lives.
So you've got this register of these swans, you know who's in, who's out. Do they have different personalities?
They do, actually, and that's the beauty of being able to study individuals. You really start to notice sort of the quirks and sort of weird oddities of certain individuals. You have individuals that may be a bit more lonery, that might like to sort of hang back a bit and have a favourite spot.
Did you just say lonery?
Yeah.
I like that.
Is that a word? Actually, it might not be.
It is now. It is a word now. Lonery.
And you have families that are particularly dominant. So quite often the bigger family units, which have maybe a number of cygnets, they really rule the roost and they throw their weight around, and they get the best feeding sites and so on. So you do start to notice these little quirks and individual habits.
So they've got different quirks, different personalities. They're also surprisingly intelligent. They can remember humans as well. You're trying to figure out who's who, but they also can tell the difference between different people, and whether certain individuals have been nice or naughty or not to them.
I'm not sure if we know whether they can tell us apart. When we're watching them actually at Slimbridge, we have to be in a hide. They're very scared of people. So I suppose they're kind of a very timid Arctic breeding species. So generally we sort of keep away from them. We're sort of hiding from them most of the time. So yeah, I don't know whether they can actually tell us apart.
Well, I'm not going to put that to the test by being mean to a swan, especially if there's rumours of them being able to break bones and stuff. I've got this. Actually, before we get onto that, let's delve into a little bit into their life cycle, or how they come together. Swans have a bit of a romantic streak. They're known as romantics because they actually pair together. They pair bond. I've heard that swans can die of a broken heart. Is this nonsense? Is this another urban myth?
To some extent, although I would say, swans are very, very loyal to each other. Actually, it's one of the most endearing sort of qualities they have. And certainly at Slimbridge, the longest pair that we've known of, it was a pair called Lamonia and Laburnum, and they were together for 21 years. Wow. So they do tend to try and mate for life where they can. And I have seen swans arrive on their own, having been in a partnership, because if their partner has died. And they do, I think, probably go through sort of a period of sort of, we would call it mourning, but they certainly are distressed. They're constantly calling, they're constantly searching for their partner. So they certainly do go through a process if they have lost their partner.
So it is. That sounds, obviously you have to say it in a scientific, a biological way. But to me, that sounds like heartbreak. It's amazing to, when you see some of this type of behaviour from animals that mirror our own behaviours at times.
Yeah, they have extremely close bonds, and they do get very distressed if they're separated. And so, yeah, I suppose it is sort of a heartbreak feeling that they go through. They can repair with others, but there certainly is a period where they are quite distressed.
Yeah. But most of the time they're together, and when obviously the result of that pair is to have an egg. And how many eggs do they lay?
They can lay up to around 6 eggs, although usually you're looking at probably around 2 or 3 cygnets hatching. Mm-hmm. A large family, a couple of years ago, we did have a family with 6 cygnets, one of which was adopted. And we knew it was an adopted cygnet because it was a slightly different growth stage to the others. And that does sometimes happen if a cygnet's lost its parents. It sometimes does try and latch on to another family. Mm.
And what do those cygnets look like? How different do they look to the adults?
When they first arrive in the autumn, they're very grey. and they're a lot smaller, and their beak is quite pinky, and we call it mushy, this sort of mushy, pinky, black sort of beak. And they've got not quite the elegant sort of bugling songful tune. They're kind of a bit squawky, and they're very clingy. So they sort of, you know, stay with their parents all the time. And actually after about a year, so they stay with their parents for quite some time. After about a year, then sort of go off and make their own way in the world.
I've got a really interesting fact here for everybody at home. Cygnus is the Latin word for swan, which makes sense because they're young, called cygnets. And it turns out that Cygnus is also a constellation of stars, also known as the Northern Cross. So in Greek mythology, the constellation represents Orpheus, who was transformed into a swan after death. Which sounds super cool. Julia, why do you think that swans have had such an impact on our culture as humans and storytelling?
It's a very good question, actually, and they are sort of enshrined and embedded in folklore and fairy tales, like, you know, in lots of different countries and across a lot of different cultures. And I wonder whether it's because they're just so sort of eye-catching and graceful and beautiful and recognisable. And certainly for the migratory swans, there's lots of myths and folklores in those countries they migrate through about their mysterious arrival and mysterious departure at certain times of the year. Of course, we now know much more about their migratory route, but centuries and centuries ago, people would just see them disappear, not really knowing like where they were going, and then they just miraculously arrive at the same time the next year. So I think they've always had this sort of mystical quality about them.
Yeah. You know, despite their place and their role in our culture and our culture, they do have an impact on people. And certainly for me as a young boy, it was always exciting to go and see the swans. You know, in parks and seeing them swimming on lakes. They just glide so effortlessly. The numbers of Bewick swans have been declining in recent years. Actually, they're down, I think, approximately or more than 30%. Why is this happening, Julia?
We're still trying to get to the bottom of exactly why fewer and fewer swans are reaching us every year. But we do know that they do face some quite challenging threats on their long migrations. So, for example, we know that they can fly into power lines, electricity cables, because they're not very visible. So particularly in fog and poor weather, the swans don't see them, and there's flying accidents happening there. And also we know that unfortunately they are still illegally shot at different sites along the migratory route.
You and your team are working to help prevent their decline. You talk about power lines. You talk about the fact that these swans are sometimes shot at. Tell us about Swan Champions. That's a project that you've been a part of for a while. So let's tell us all about it and how that's helping to hopefully boost the numbers of Bewick swans.
Yeah, the Swan Champions are a collective of people that live up in the Donetsk Autonomous Okrug, which is a region in the Russian Arctic where the Bewick swans breed, and they've come together and they represent all aspects of society up there. So there's indigenous leaders, there's representatives from hunting organisations, there's educators and conservationists as well, and teachers, and they've sort of all come together to commit to really trying to help the Bewick swan and to try and really support their conservation and to reduce their hunting, because we know illegal hunting is an issue on their breeding grounds as well. So they're rolling out lots of activities to raise awareness about the species. That's in the classroom. So there was this lovely travelling swan exhibition that happened and visited all the remote communities a couple of months ago, and also resources for hunters to really let hunters know which species you really mustn't shoot and they are protected. So lots of information there going out to their communities, and it's becoming quite impactful.
So this whole project, the Swan Champions project, it sounds like it's not just one individual or one group, it's a collective of different people across several different countries that cover that flyway.
Exactly, and it goes far beyond conservationists and national park workers and scientists as well, actually, because the future of the Bewick swan is in the hands of everyone. Actually, it's in the hands of farmers, it's in the hands of young people and hunters as well. So it's a very broad-ranging group group of people who are all enthusiastic and have the same aim, which is to help the Bewicks.
I'm just going to play this quick clip of you looking after a swan. Can you tell us what was happening here? It's one of the videos that you sent through to me.
So is that the one at the swan catch where, so if I'm carrying a swan?
Yeah, it looks like you're looking right now at an X-ray of a swan. What's happening there?
So we're looking for birds that have been shot at, so birds that are carrying shot in their bodies. So these are live birds that we've caught at Slimbridge, but when we X-ray them, we can see shot in their bodies, and that indicates they have been illegally shot at some point along their journey. So this is one of the methods we use to understand how prevalent illegal shooting is for the species.
And we can see you here walking. It seems kind of bizarre. Someone looks like you've got a swan tucked into a handbag. It looks super bizarre. But you obviously have such a deep-rooted passion for animals and for these birds, and we can see this swan's up and away it goes.
I mean, it's a privilege to be close to these birds. Yeah, they're usually very wild.
What predators do swans come across? Do swans even have any predators?
I suppose humans really are the biggest predator for them. In terms of natural predators, in the Arctic foxes actually can take the eggs and potentially young cygnets, and also big birds of prey can take young birds too. But for the adults, it's mostly humans, I'm afraid.
I suppose that's one thing you don't think about when you think of predators. You think of the predators that are going to go for the adults, but it's just as important to look after the chicks as well, because it's not just adults. There's chicks. There's also the habitat.
Absolutely, yeah. We need to look after the cygnets coming into the world and also protect their wetland habitats.
You actually have the ability to track some of these swans as they migrate back and forth. One of them, a few of them have some interesting names. Can you tell us about the swans that you're able to track, their names, and what kind of data you're able to gather from keeping a close eye on them?
Yeah, for a number of swans, we've managed to catch them and fit them with a GPS sort of transmitter, which means that when they're flying, we can see exactly where they are. So we upload a map and we can track exactly how far they're going on their migration. So we have a couple of swans at the moment, one called Leo. It's 3 swans, Leo, Hope and Elroy. And I looked at Elroy and Hope's maps this morning, and they're just entering Russia now, actually. So it's really exciting. They left the UK a couple of months ago, and they're well on their way now to their breeding grounds.
That's so cool. So is there any way that anybody at home can keep an eye on these swans, or is it like a closely guarded secret?
Well, we have a page on our website called Swan News, and we quite often blog there about bring the latest news really about how they're progressing on their journeys and other swan conservation work we're doing.
Fantastic. Well, maybe we'll get that page into the description below, so everybody can check that out. Just a few more questions from me before I let you go. What is it for you why do you do what you do? I mentioned that in the bio, in the description of this video, that your inspiration came from I believe your mother and your grandfather going for walks in Somerset when you were a young girl. From then to now, what is it that keeps you going and wanting to work with animals?
I think there's never been a more important time really to help protect the natural environment. You know, we're seeing catastrophic loss of animals and wildlife around the world, and we're starting to see quite serious impacts of climate change. So we're in quite a scary place in terms of what's going on with our environment. And I think it would be a really terrible shame for us to be losing our swans and our animals. And it really helps drive me forward, knowing how many problems they face. It really is now the time to come together to try and help save them.
What is your favourite? 2 questions. What is your favourite? Are Bewicks your favourite swans? I know you work with them, but are they your favourites?
Yeah, they're definitely my favourite because I can. Yeah, I think knowing them as individuals and knowing a lot of their names. Yeah, I've got a bit of a connection to Bewicks. Yeah.
The Bewicks. And outside of swans, what animals do you like working with? I know you've worked with a few in the past.
Yeah, so I'm really interested in whales. I think they're really mysterious and really interesting mammals that sort of cruise through the oceans. And I've done a bit of voluntary work with whales before in Tenerife. But to be honest, I don't really have any favourites. I mean, I just really like the natural world. I like being out in nature and around wildlife, and I like it all, really.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, I know that you at WWT are trying to inspire children to connect with the natural world and bringing the wild home for them during this lockdown period. What kind of resources do you guys have that kids can interact with?
Yeah, so every Monday at the moment we're releasing some resources for parents and teachers to help use with their children, and it's really lots of interactive resources that would teach kids about the natural world and conservation science and climate change and all those key themes. So each Monday there'll be a new theme that's released with a whole package of resources, which will hopefully help inspire young people to take an interest in, perhaps even become their own, conservation scientists themselves.
Awesome. Well, I think you sent me a link, so I'll include that in the description below for everybody that wants to be a part of that. Julia, thank you so much for your time. I think we've got to 25 minutes, I reckon. That's been great, and it's amazing to meet someone like yourself who's really passionate about birds and animals, and just getting to see some of those clips of the work that you do. When's the best time for everybody to head down to Slimbridge to see these swans arrive?
Well, hopefully when we're allowed out again.
Fingers crossed.
There's lots going on. I mean, throughout the summer, there's lots of young birds kicking around, and mute swans will be there all year round. And then come the autumn, that's another exciting phase where you start to see the arrival of the Bewicks from Russia. So that's from about October time, but plenty going on in the summer as well.
Good stuff. And I think you mentioned that they start to arrive at Slimbridge around October, November.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and then numbers will build up, and they'll stay with us for the winter then. So. And
then when they finally make their journey back towards Russia.
They usually start leaving in February. So you'll have a good few months to see them at Slimbridge. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Julia, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today and finding out about the Swan Champions project that you're a part of, and just hearing about your passion for swans. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks very much. It's been great.
Good stuff. Right. Take care. That was Dr. Julia Newth there joining us from the Wildfound and Wetlands Trust, telling us about her passion for swans. On our next episode, which is going to be on Wednesday at 11 a.m, we're going to be joined by Rachel Gunn. She is a marine biologist, and she's going to be telling us all about oval butterfly fish. If you don't know what an oval butterfly fish is, it's a similar species to Dory from Finding Nemo. So we're going to be talking all things Dory on Wednesday. Until then, please remember to smash that subscribe button and also click the little alert bell. It'll tell you when we go live, when new videos come up. But yeah, it's been great. I'm looking forward to getting some more videos out there for you. And remember, please leave a comment. Tell us what you think about these Wild and Live shows so far, or if there are any subjects that you'd like us to cover. But until Wednesday, take care and look after yourselves, and I will see you guys all next time. See ya.